Greetings, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Mistake Zone, your weekly dose of our lives and the mistakes within them. My name is Jaren Wade. Joining me, as always, one of my best friends in the whole wide world, Matt Alba. Hey, Matt.
Yo.
How are you doing?
Yo, I'm doing good.
Matt, that's great. Matt, you know what just occurred to me while I was doing our standard introduction to this episode?
What's up?
You could, Matt, once again, you edit the episodes of the Mistake Zone, which I thank you profusely for. I really appreciate it. But while I was doing the introduction for this week's episode, I thought, man, Matt could literally take one of the introductions we've done previously and slot it in, and I don't think anyone would be of the wiser.
No,
And
Jen.
Matt, I think in a pinch, let's say something happened and I was on vacation and you needed to repurpose an episode that we recorded way before the date in question, and you realize, oh no, the introduction is off. There's a little slurping noise from Jaren because he slurps his words a lot. And wait a minute, I can totally just pull from the Mistake Zone 2019 episode, spring season episode, whatever.
Jaren.
Matt, did I open the floodgates of bad ideas in your head?
Jaren, I don't know if this is a bad idea or not. Maybe it's a bad idea, but I don't know if you've seen recently on just like YouTube or just generally on the internet of AI audio. Have you seen that stuff, Jaren?
I have, Matt, all this AI stuff is really spooky to me, so I haven't dabbled that much in AI generated things. But Matt, what's the deal with AI generated audio right now?
So, Jaren, I think right now AI generated audio is pretty good because basically what you're going to do is you plug in some audio clips of someone talking, the more the better, and it can replicate their voice and talking mannerisms when you kind of turn them into a text to speech kind of bot. And one of the things, Jaren, that I've really been into watching lately is basically Trump and Biden playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Trump and Biden playing video games in general. And I think that's like a really good goof.
Is that why I keep getting recommended Trump, Biden, and Obama tell us their favorite HoloLive members?
Yes. That is probably exactly what it is. It's just Trump, Biden, and Obama kind of just talking. And Jaren, the AI that's doing the voices for these, I think is actually pretty good. But two, someone is writing these skits, Jaren, and man, that person's killing it. It's so good. If you haven't dived into this kind of a thing, it's a good goof, like all around, I think.
Man, Matt. Now I'm thinking, okay, Matt, let's step into the Black Mirror zone for a minute. And man, Matt, just not only us, but all our favorite podcasts, all our favorite kind of content creators and influencers and YouTubers and, everyone that produces content. There's so much content of ours voices out there, so easily accessible right now that, man, if someone really wanted to, it's kind of spooky that someone could take us riffing on our dumb mistakes on a weekly basis and pump that into an AI and have a Matt and Jaren soundboard at the rip. Not that I expect anyone to do it, but the fact that that possibility exists is somewhat amusing to me, but also terrifying. And I wonder how many times that AI version of the Mistake Zone has that version of Jaren going, I can't talk properly. Even if I've been podcasting for so long, dropping likes every now and like every couple of sentences. And man, I'm curious to where the likes would be inserted in that soundboard or in that generated speech, because I think that would be a good goof. Terrifying goof, but a good goof nonetheless.
Jared, I have seriously been considering that. I have thought about, hey, if there's, in particular, especially since you're going to be gone for a few weeks in April, I have seriously thought about, hey, maybe I should plug our episodes into in AI and and try to do a. I want to try to write an episode of the Mistake Zone because I think that would be a really funny goof. But also, Jaren, one thing that I've really liked seeing content creators doing recently, especially when it's content groups of whatever they might be, like streamers but in particular in this instance podcasters, which is they plug their episodes into an AI and they have the AI generate a script. Like this is old news, Jaren, of people plugging stuff in and generating a script, and usually these scripts are kind of okay. But with this added layer, Jaren, of people now plugging their content, podcasts or whatever, into a AI to generate an AI script, and then having AI audio read out that episode as them. Ooh, Jared, that's some primo goofs right there.
Man, Matt, that's a primo goof. Part of me is, oh, this is our bleak future, terrifying future at a glance, and everyone's laughing at it. One of those, the tried and true. We debated if we could. In reality, we debated if we should or something along those lines. I don't know the quote. But at the same time, Matt, knowing me and my dumb head, if that ever happened, this is prime when I'm like senile in like 20 years thinking, oh yeah, that's I remember talking about that episode, and that's when you hit me. No, Jaren, that wasn't you. That was the AI. And then I'll go, oh no.
We haven't recorded the Mistake Zone in over 20 years. Oh man.
Thanks, Matt. I hate it.
Jared, man, if my computer was good enough, I would so want to do that. I'd want to specifically create one of the Mistake Zone now, one of the Mistake Zone during anime time, and one of like season 2 Saturday Morning Arcade to see what dumb game the AI decides to create.
Man, ethical dilemma aside, I feel like the Mistake Zone Jaren character is so easy to do. All you need to do is insert like every couple of words, say that he, after 10 years of poop casting, that he still can't speak properly, throw in some random Bang Dream tangent. What else? What's a classic Jaren? Talk about, I don't know, Muna from Hololive. I think Mistake Zone Jaren rates themselves right now, Matt. But Matt, I didn't expect to psychoanalyze myself today, Matt, and now I feel weird. I feel real weird at all, but yeah, Matt, it still trips me out how we would always goof about, oh, let's just make a friend soundboard, and now we're goofing about AI generating our episodes, and I can't tell if I should be amused or terrified. I think both, Matt, is a good balance of the two. But Matt, this is one of those weirdo weeks in the Mistake Zone where, oh man, Matt, did you see what happened in the latest video game and anime news? That was sure compelling enough for us to dedicate an entire episode to talking about how the industries we follow changes. But Matt Alba, what's going on in your life right now?
Jaren, I think that right now it's probably it's probably a rainy day outside, Jaren. What could be happening right now for me? Jaren, I think the thing that's really throwing me off right now is I don't know when this episode's coming out.
Me neither. So, once again,
what would have happened?
Inside baseball, I'm probably on vacation when all our friends hear this episode of The Mistake Zone. So, we're recording this a little in advance.
Jared, I was really sad to hear that you lost your luggage at the airport. I don't want to goof about that, Jared. That's too real. Actually.
That's actually terrifying and could happen. But since this is a bit earlier, I was thinking that we could treat this episode as kind of a journal of sorts. Not that the Mistake Zone is any different. That I do like treating these as a journal and something that we can both reminisce over mutual interests of ours. And I think one console in particular that I always wanted to kind of rap about with you, Matt Alba, is the
Hmm.
tried and true Nintendo 64. And I don't know what it is about the Nintendo 64, Matt, but I feel like this was the console for us growing up where I don't know why, but I feel like all my family members, a lot of friends that I met in school, that the Nintendo 64 was the tried and true system of I'm going to someone's house for the first time. If they played video games, they would have a Nintendo 64 in their living room. And I feel
Hmm.
like that was a staple of so many friend get togethers, of so many fam jams. And it's a system that holds a special place in my heart. So, to start things off on the mistake zone deep dive of the Nintendo 64, Matt, what was your relationship with the console growing up? Did it have that same staying power of it being the de facto fam jam console? And do you remember when you first purchased your own or received your own?
Yeah, I remember receiving mine for Christmas. I don't remember which Christmas it was, but I definitely remember receiving it during Christmas, and I was so excited to finally have my own. Because up until that point, I had really just been playing the N64 at my cousin's place,
Right.
and I don't know, Jen, like I'd had the Nintendo, or I'd had the NES like prior, I'd had the SNES prior, but I think that the N64 really was coming to me at an age where I could really start to appreciate it.
Right.
And I don't know, it was just so high. I remember getting it. I remember getting that my like navy blue controller. I remember looking at it like, oh, well, this is so cool. Hey, it's like the A button's invisible because it's the same color as the rest of the controllers. It's like really, really cool. And I don't know, it was the de facto gameplay experience for me and my extended family when we were growing up. It was definitely always attached to the TV. Like I had a PlayStation, but the PlayStation really was more so for me myself to play
Right.
solo games, whereas the N64 was there for both solo games and playing with the family. And personally, I really feel like that's mostly driven by the fact that the Nintendo 64 by default had four ports
Yep.
instead of the PlayStation only having the two, and then you needed to buy a multi tap. But yeah, Jen, I have so many memories growing up of playing N64 games and just enjoying my time with them, and especially going to Blockbuster, renting a game, and either really enjoying it or not realizing that someone put the wrong game behind the wrong box, so I got a game I wasn't expecting, or renting a game that I really wanted to play and then it being not good, or me needing a memory card and never ever having one. So you'd have to replay that game over and over or leave the Nintendo 64 on.
Matt, so
Hmm.
many. I feel like we'll definitely get to the blockbuster renting experience in a bit,
Hmm.
but I think you said something that really, you know, made an impression on me and really sums up what my experience with the Nintendo 64 was, in that I feel like it came out for us anyway at an age where we could really appreciate it as a video game system and kind of appreciate video games as a whole. I think that's especially true for myself just because in my case, I didn't have that many video games growing up. I had like I believe a Game Boy, and that was mostly it. My experience with, the NES, the SNES, that came from, going to my various cousins' houses. And I think when the Nintendo 64 did come out, that was around the time we were in the first or second grade. So I was getting a better comprehension of what video games were. This was such a new medium for me and my household at the very least, where when the Nintendo 64 was announced, that was the only thing in my mind. I ended up getting the Nintendo 64 for, I believe, my eighth birthday. birthday or so. So I ended up getting it a couple of months after it was released. And I remember on the road to me getting that console from my parents and my grandparents at the time, it was like a really big couple of months of just me being really excited. I think one of the most it's a memory that I'm kind of embarrassed to think about, but I remember in the second grade we were talking about, I think it was like a show and tell, and I think for one show and tell I brought in like a magazine that showed off the Nintendo 64 and said, I'm getting this for my birthday in like so
Nice.
many months. And I remember at the time too, my parents were trying to talk me out of it of, oh, don't you want like an SNES or, what our my cousin Joe had at the time, just so we'd be able to share games. And it was,
Uh
no,
huh.
I want like the newest thing. This is like the N64. It's in 3D. Like it had all the marketing really got to me at the time just because again, I'm just a kid who never had their own video game console growing up. So all these things, all the selling points of, oh, 3D worlds, this analog stick, just all of that really got to me and made me go, no, I want this. And,
Uh
bless my
huh.
parents, bless my grandparents. I finally got it for my birthday alongside Mario Kart 64. And that, I
Hmm.
think, when I think back to Mario Kart 64, I think about me finishing dinner and asking my parents, is it okay if I go play the Nintendo 64 now? And me not fully comprehending what, the point of Mario Kart was. I think I told you really late, Matt, that, oh, I didn't even realize you had to drift in Mario Kart until like a million games down the series. But
I think I started drifting during Double Dash.
yeah. So it was just me doing time trials just because I kept losing to the computer. So I would just like drive time trials and just drive the same laps over and over of like the Moo Moo farm or like the circuit level. And
Uh
that
huh.
was entertainment for me. Like that was the time where that
Hmm.
in that era, like how often did you get new games? Just because I think for my household, it was new game for Christmas, new game for your birthday, and that was it. And luckily, I know it's a bit rougher for you, Matt, if that was the case for you, but for me, there's like a good period between my birthday and like Christmas. So that gave me, ample time to enjoy the games I did get. But was that something that you remember how often you got new games for your Nintendo 64?
I didn't really get them over the life of the console. I believe I probably
Hmm.
got maybe, I want to say, two a year, but that's only if you average it. Because I think the way that it ended
Right.
up going for me is that when we initially got it that first year, I'm pretty sure that, we ended up with Goldeneye, ended up with Zelda, ended up with what other N64 games were out then? We ended up with like a bunch of stuff like Pokemon Snap or Pokemon Stadium. We would get. I remember having just a lot of games towards the start, but I also remember that my library never really expanded that much. I think
Yeah,
maybe
I totally
yeah,
know what you
we
mean.
had
Yeah.
like 7 or 8 games, but we bought those 7 or 8 games within the first 2 years, and then from then on, it was always just renting games.
Yep. And man, Matt, I think when I think about like the games that I did own, I think my first game was Mario Kart 64, which I said I got that alongside the console. I also got it alongside, you know, two third party, I want to say Mad Catz controllers. Like,
Nice.
I'm not sure if you remember them, like the big bulky controllers that were see-through that weren't
Uh huh.
Nintendo
Uh
official,
huh.
but that the EB clerk upsold my mom on them and said, no, these are I
Perfectly
for some
fine.
reason I specifically, yeah, these are perfectly fine. So I used the gray default controller, and I was that older brother where my siblings used like the third party ones when we would all play Mario Kart together.
Uh huh.
But yeah, I remember, I think back at it where the first game I ever got was Mario Kart 64, and then for Christmas I asked for Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong Racing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's too
Mm-hmm.
many racing games for someone who doesn't understand how to properly play racing games. So
Uh
I
huh.
feel like I made some bad choices on my early N64 days, but Matt, You alluded to it when we first started talking about it. This was during the heyday of renting at Blockbuster. And Matt, do you remember the first game that you ever rented and where you rented it from
I mean,
for the Nintendo 64?
I do think I remember when the N64 came out. We didn't even go to really blockbusters. There was just us, it's kind of like mom and pop kind of rental services, and we had one of those like across the street from my townhouse complex growing up. And Jaren, I really really remember renting from there Bomberman 64.
Oh, Matt,
Yeah.
such a classic.
That was one of the first
Such a
games
classic.
I ever remember renting. And Jared, I am so glad for my younger self that someone had already progressed really far into that game, because I don't think I could have grasped that when I was that young. But
It's
man.
so funny that you mention it, you put it that way, because I was exactly the same way growing up, where I feel like any game that gave me a pre-existing save file, I came to really appreciate, just because, Matt, I said it a few weeks back as well. I was bad at video games growing up. Like, I couldn't comprehend it, and I couldn't really comprehend any new game that I got. And for the most part, it was just me dicking around, and renting was a way for me to really kind of enjoy a lot of different games on the Nintendo 64, where again, like I only received 2 games a year, and I'm really thankful for that. But I know a lot of the times, a lot of the early memories I have with the console was through renting. And the first game that I rented was, again, it wasn't from Blockbuster, it was from kind of this video rental place in a Asian grocery plaza. It was like, one of those Asian grocery strip malls, and it was just like one of those kind of booths in the middle of the food court for some reason. And I remember renting Doom 64 from there,
Nice.
playing it as a whatever, like under 10 years old, getting this, I'm assuming a T-rated game or an M-rated game at the time, bringing it home. I believe it needed an expansion or a memory pack or whatever, which we didn't have. And Matt, I didn't get a memory pack until like 2 Christmases after. So I remember the experience of me renting Doom 64, of one, not understanding what was going on. And bless my dad's heart, Matt, my dad came in clutch in the early days of N64, because a lot of the times I think about Doom 64, I believe it was Hexen 64, of me not understanding how to play. And then I totally admit that me being like an 8-year-old, is how this sounds really bad, but it was just me bawling my eyes out to my dad saying, I don't understand this game. And him taking the time to read through the instructions and like teaching me how to play games. And like, I think that's like what really, those are some of my fondest memories of just me being a friggin' baby, Matt, and being a child, and my dad having to, take the time to learn video games to teach me how to like actually play, and not having a controller pack. So it was just me redoing the same, the start of Doom 64. I remember you had to find like the yellow keys just to get to the end of the level. And just me doing that over and over again for 3 days, where Matt, I know within the last year they re-released Doom 64 on like the Epic Game Store, and I think they gave it away for free on the Epic Game Store. And I remember playing through it and going, Matt, this doesn't hit the same, because one, I know what I'm doing. I know how to progress. And when I finished the first level of Doom 64, like I just stopped, because I thought, no, that's enough, Matt. That's enough for me. But yeah, I think I also remember where after I returned Doom 64, I wanted to rent Clay Fighter 64 or
man.
63 and a third. And that rental place didn't have it. And then I remember Matt was such a fucking bitch growing up. Sorry, I know I try not to curse on this like episode, but now it was just me. I remember me whining, my dad taking me to Blockbuster, him getting a membership for Blockbuster so I could rent Clay Fighter 63 and third, and remembering how bad I was at that game because Matt, fighting games are hard. They're still hard.
Yeah.
But I think what I attached to Clay Fighter 63 and a third was my mom saying, why do you keep wasting money renting games that you don't get to keep? Why don't you just save up and then buy games so you own them forever? And Matt, I think deep down that really resonates with me and how I purchase things today as well. But Matt, what are some other, because you went through the gauntlet of when you think about renting games, but in your examples that you shared earlier in the episode, were there any choice memories you have from renting that either went your way or didn't go your way?
Actually, okay. More so towards ones that did go my way, Jaren. I don't know if you had this experience. Maybe not because of that anecdote you just shared about saving up and buying the game. But
Yeah.
for me, there was games where like my parents would bring me to Blockbuster or Rogers or that mom and pop store, and we would... or I would get to like rent a game for the weekend so that I would have something to do. And if there wasn't a new game that piqued my interest, there was always some old reliable games that I would rent again.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever did that when you were a kid or not.
No, I didn't have an old reliable. Matt, sorry. An aside. This reminded me of the time when I went to a school book fair. Sorry, Matt, this is going to be so stupid. I went to a school book fair. There was this dinosaur book. I, once again, threw another tantrum because I was a child. My mom bought me said dinosaur book. I read it and was so happy. 2 weeks later, I saw the same dinosaur book at the library. So I borrowed it from the school library, brought it home, and then held them both up in front of my mom and said, Mom, look, we had it at the library. And my mom gave me the most disgusting look.
Good go.
Oh, man.
Good go.
But yeah, Matt, I didn't have like the old reliables when it came, but what were your old reliables when it came to renting games for the N64?
Like I mentioned earlier, Bomberman 64 was one of the ones that I'd like renting, and I would always be kind of sad when there wasn't a, basically completed save file on there already.
Right.
But like one of the other ones that I really, really loved renting, that also falls into that same kind of category of I hope there's a completed save file on here, is Glover. I don't know if you remember that game.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Glover was... something about Glover just really, really appealed to me. Like the simple design of the main character and the kind of... You get to switch your powers by switching the ball that you're pushing around. Something about that was like very appealing to me.
That recently was re-released on Steam, correct? Did you play the re-release?
Oh, was it?
Or...
I actually don't even... I don't think I even heard about that. Oh man, hang on, wait, Jaren, I gotta go on Steam real quick.
Same.
Oh, Jaren, it's on there. 1481 Canadian. Ooh,
35% off.
35% off.
Steam sale.
Mixed reviews. Oh man, half the sound effects did not play like they once did. Lots of bugs. Classic. Maybe I'll just hope it comes out on Nintendo Switch Online.
Oh man, Matt. I don't know about you, but like speaking about Glover, for some reason Glover exists in this weird, I guess, realm of games on the Nintendo 64 that I would see Glover, I would see Space Station, Silicon Valley, I would see Mischief Makers, and Mythical Ninja starring Goemon. Those would be always, not necessarily always available, but it was always those boxes that really most intrigued me at Blockbuster. And for some reason, I consider those games that were just so alienated or just alien to me, where I didn't understand what they were. But at the same time, for some reason, these were the four games that I never rented, but thought, okay, video games could be so much more than what I think in my head, just because until that point, I told you, Matt, I didn't have a console growing up. I mainly played, racing games. I went after like the first games I went to were Doom, Clay Fighter, like things that looked cool. But I think when it came to like those four games I mentioned, it
Mm-hmm.
really defines, hey, the box art looks cool. I should play this game. And those, I
Uh-huh.
remember when I think about games that I always saw at Blockbuster at the time, those four immediately stick out to me. And I was curious, Matt, do you have any experience with well, Glover aside, do you have any experience with Mystical Ninja, Mischief Makers, or Space Station Silicon Valley?
I always saw the box for Mischief Makers. Is that the one with the kind of like green
Yeah.
fairy on the front? Yeah, that box art in particular never appealed to me.
Okay.
I just looked up the Space Station Silicon Valley. I've never seen this game before, Jared.
Really?
I
Okay.
did not know
I
this
guess we went
existed
to
until
different
just now.
blockbusters growing up.
And but Mystical Ninja Goemon was one of the ones that I would rent when I saw it, and I don't really, Jaren, have a good recollection of that, or like, and not a good recollection, but I mean more like a favorable recollection of that game,
Yeah.
because I remember that game being very obtuse when I was
Right.
playing it. I didn't understand what was going on, and I think at that point there was like no instruction manuals inside of the boxes anymore because people just steal them, I
Yep.
guess.
Yep.
So they wouldn't always be there, but I do remember renting that one a couple times, even though I never really understood what was going on in there. It kind of, for me, as a memory cardless boy, fell into the same realm as Quest 64.
Matt, we have to talk about Quest 64 because I feel like I ran into the same issue as well, where I didn't have a memory card, as I said, and Quest 64 was definitely one of the games I rented. I think when I think back to Quest 64, I think about how I would explore, the starting castle like so many times. I knew like there was a bunch of hidden chests that you can find for like rupees or something. And the farthest I would ever get was the first forest area, and I
Mhm,
would just
mhm.
replay that introduction and the forest area over and over. And I think the farthest
Uh-huh.
I've ever made it before I had to turn off the console was getting to the area after the forest and then seeing this sun enemy or whatever in like a desert or open plain field or
Oh,
something.
never got
And
that
that's
far.
that's the furthest I've ever got in Quest 64. And for some reason, Quest 64 lives in this weird part of my brain where it's one of those I should try to go and actually find this game and actually play through
Mhm.
this game because I feel like the myth, the legend of Quest 64 in my head is so much bigger than what that game actually is,
Mhm.
probably in its, full form. But Matt, what's your relationship with Quest 64?
I think my relationship with Quest 64 is basically exactly the same as yours, except I didn't get as far into the game. Like,
Okay.
it does for me exist in this weird place where I always want to be like, hey, maybe I should spin up a N64 emulator and go play Quest 64. I want to see
Yeah.
what this game actually was and if it holds up. Because like in my head right now, I'm thinking about Quest 64. I feel like maybe it could still be good. I remember it kind of having a you lock into basically a battle arena and you cast
Yep.
spells like that. That sounds like it'd still be a good system. I am right now, Jaren. I'm just really, really, really now hoping that that game shows up on the Nintendo Switch Online N64 service.
Okay. So far we have your wish list of Glover
Uh
and
huh.
Quest 64. All
And
right.
Jaren, while we're on that wish list, Kirby 64 was one of the games that I kept renting whenever I would go to
So good,
a rental
Matt.
place. And I
So
am,
good.
Jaren, I am so glad that that is on the Nintendo 64 Switch service. I think that Kirby 64 was the first rental game I beat within the rental
Okay.
period. That's like a very notable memory for me because man,
Oh man,
I
Matt.
I really enjoyed that game when I was younger. I guess now too, as when I was like playing it last week. But
That was the one with the mini games as well, like the multiplayer mini games,
yeah,
correct?
dude, those mini games, I'm bad at those mini games. Like the fruit catching one, I have no concept of timing in there. I was playing it with Kevin and Rakush, and I just kept swapping them into. I guess kept putting the fruits into their baskets. There was the floor tile one, which is actually very very fun still, where you're kind of just highlighting all the. You're on like a grid. Everybody's on a grid. You're highlighting the tiles in front of you, and then those tiles fall. So you're trying to knock people off. It's basically that Fall Guys mini game, but like cranked up. There was one other mini game,
Man.
but I can't remember what it was. But yeah, the mini games in that were really really fun as a multiplayer experience. I just wish that there was maybe more, but I guess that's not really what the Kirby game is for.
Matt, what was it about the N64? I know the answer is probably the four controller ports, but what was it about the N64 that, like, a lot of these games from Kirby to, the classic Pokemon Stadium, like, they had multiplayer mini games that were of a really good quality that they didn't have any right to be. And again, we can't mention the Kirby mini games without mentioning the Pokemon Stadium mini
Yeah.
games. And as someone who was so excited to rent Pokemon Stadium for the first time, I remember that was a game, I think Pokemon Stadium, and I think there was a sequel, correct?
Yeah, Pokemon Stadium too.
Where I think if you getting the transfer pack, like this, I know we'll get to accessories and all the dumb bullshit that the N64 had in a bit, but I don't know about you, Matt, but when I rented Pokemon Stadium, them giving you the transfer pack, I feel like was a toss up, and it really depended on, I think, if the clerk knew what you were renting. And Matt, of course, one, I was a baby, but two, I was still a timid kid growing up, so I would never outwardly ask for the transfer pack. But yeah, Matt, I remember the first time I rented Pokemon Stadium, I didn't have the transfer pack. I used whatever was in the in-game PCs at the time, and not only did it blow my mind because, oh, cool, I can see Pokemon in 3D for the first time, but Matt, those mini games like made such a good impression on me, and I sometimes think about it a lot of the times too, where I'm really curious why we don't see those type of mini games inserted into games anymore. Just because those were really fun, and
Yeah.
I remember that even like this was way after the N64, heyday, but a lot of my extended memories is going to our pal Julian's house and then him breaking out the N64 and us just playing those Pokemon mini games together, where for some reason those had such staying power, especially to our generation that grew up with them. But Matt, what do you remember, and do you have any memories of Pokemon Stadium and the mini games within them?
Jaren, I love the Pokemon Stadium mini games. Like, actually, Jaren, I'm curious about this. What is the first game you think of when you think of the Pokemon Stadium mini games? Because I know I have one that I default to when I think about them.
Matt, when we first started talking about this segment, I thought of the Sandshrew game, just
Okay.
because I think the Sandshrew game sticks out to me the most, just because, Matt, the fail state of the Sandshrew game, correct me if I'm wrong, is doesn't Sandshrew get hit with like a fire hydrant, or like he's like hit with, like your Sandshrew is like hit with water. And from the Pokemon anime, I learned that, oh, Sandshrews can't be exposed to water. That's really bad. So I'm scarred from losing in the Sandshrew game, and thinking, oh no, I'm really hurt. My Sandshrews really hurting right now because I'm bad at video games. And I think for that morbid reason, like I'll think about the Clefairy game, I'll think about the sushi stuff, but it's the Sandshrew that always is the instant one I think of, because Matt, I'm bad at video games, and that means my Sandshrew is suffering right now.
Jaren, I actually think that the water thing is the win state.
Oh, is it?
I'm pretty sure because I think you just don't hit anything if you lose. It's the first person who
Right.
hits water, which is actually super super messed up when you even like look at it from the Pokemon weakness point of view.
But yeah, I think that's why. Well, there was a water element. That's all I
Uh huh. Uh
remember, and
huh.
I think that's why. Like, sure, I'll think about the sushi one after. I'll think about the Lickitung game after. I'll think about the Clefairy game after. But it's that suffering Sandshrew that I instantly think about when I think about Pokemon mini games. But
Okay.
Matt, what do you think about what's the de facto Pokemon mini game?
Jaren, for me, the de facto Pokemon minigame that I think of is the Ekans and Diglett game, where
Oh,
where
right,
you have to
right.
fling the Ekans onto like the Diglets that are popping up, like kind of like a ring toss.
Yeah.
And Jaren, the reason that that is the de facto game that I think of is because that has the wildest control scheme in I think any of the any across any game in Nintendo
Matt,
64. I don't know if you remember it, Jaren.
Matt, please enlighten me because I'm beginning to remember the game, but I don't remember how it controls.
Jaren, the way that you control this game is that you use the D-pad to kind of like aim your Ekans left and right. So you have your left hand there. But Jared, to launch the Ekans, you have to flick your control stick. So your hands are on your right hand is on the control stick and your left hand is on the D-pad. And it's kind of like a flicking game, so you have to like, however far back you pull the controller is how far you're like launching your Ekans. And that control scheme, Jaren, is one of the wildest things that I remember experiencing as a kid. Like I remember thinking this is so crazy, like this control scheme that it's just ingrained into my mind.
Man, Matt. Okay. So, Matt,
Hmm.
the theme of this episode is I'm bad at video games because I just don't bother reading instructions and I didn't have zero like game, comprehension growing up. But when you talk about the N64 controller, and I think we're conditioned from, Mario Kart and, from Mario 64, from Zelda, like, the tried and true variation is okay, your hands are on the middle, like the middle leg or something with the analog stick, just because you have access to
Hmm.
the Z button there as well.
Yeah.
And then you use the face buttons. And for some reason, I don't know, when I think about it, the N64 controller is so weird, Matt. The try nature of it with like the three prongs, like for some reason, I'm not sure how that was greenlit, but again, I think that was part of like the mystique of the N64 controller.
Hmm.
And before I get into my story about me once again being a dumb kid,
Uh-huh.
Matt, what do you think about the N64 controller overall? And like like when you think about the quote unquote natural way to hold it of holding the middle prong and then the right prong, like was that comfortable for you thinking back, or do you have any thoughts about just the controller in general?
Looking back on it now as a childish adult, that controller was wild. Like that design is insane. But back then, I thought it was the coolest thing. It
Yep.
it was a unique controller. It had a button on the back, which was very novel for me as a kid. You can hold it in multiple ways, which is was cool to me. And Jaren, I also I also vividly remember using, just because of how weirdly shaped the Nintendo 64 controller is, remember using it as a spaceship when I was playing with toys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
I I totally admit that, Matt.
Hmm.
When I think about just like the, for lack of a better term, creativity that the N64 instilled with me, Matt, I don't know if you did this, but I vividly remember times where I would turn on like a sports event, like I'd watch a game of basketball or soccer or hockey,
Uh-huh.
and then hold my N64 controller and pretend that I was actually playing what was on screen for some reason. And I don't know what it was. Maybe that's why I think about the Nintendo 64 being my golden age of gaming, just because again, it was at a time where I didn't have, that was my first video game console. I didn't have access to, you know, it wasn't like now where I had the disposable income. It was games were to be rented every few weeks, back to back weeks if I was lucky, or I would get it twice a year. But for some reason, that's where I associate so many memories. Where I think the reason I asked you to do, hey, do you want to do like an N64 centric episode is I feel like a lot of those memories are so ingrained in me where, sure, we could do a PlayStation 2 episode, a GameCube episode, a
Hmm.
360 episode,
Hmm.
where I think if we were to do those, I would need time to really prep to do that.
Yeah.
But with the N64, since it was such, that was at such a time for me where, like an impressionable time for me, where
Hmm.
a lot of this is ingrained in me, where I can just, go at it at the rip and share all my embarrassing stories about me being a little brat. But yeah, Matt, it's the idea that the golden age of video games for the person is when you know, games made such a big impression on you. And I was wondering, is that something you also kind of feel with the N64, or does another console in particular scratch that itch for you?
No, I do think that it was the Nintendo 64 like that really set my game habits for, or like is my
Right.
most like memorable like game experiences. Really the only other thing I can think of from around that time is arguably the Game Boy, but I do think that the Nintendo 64 is probably the strongest candidate for like nostalgic gaming or like super impressionable gaming for me.
Right. Oh, I totally agree, Matt. And anyway, I took a little detour, but when you were telling me about, holding the controller for that Atkins Diglett game in Pokemon Stadium, I
Uh-huh.
immediately remembered that, Matt,
Mhm.
one of the classic genres on the N64 was the N64 wrestling games,
Mhm.
especially those that came from Aki. So, you had WCW NWO World Tour, WCW versus NWO Revenge. You had WWF WrestleMania 2000, WWF No Mercy, and just a bunch of exclusive Japanese games as well. And I remember WCW versus NWO Revenge was a game that I really wanted just because at the time
Mhm.
I was also really getting into wrestling for the first time as well. And just seeing these larger of life characters, I wanted the new game, which was Revenge, that was coming out.
Uh-huh.
And I remember, Matt, I know we talk about it every now and then about how ridiculously expensive games are getting, especially here in Canada. But Matt, back in the day of the heyday of the N64, like WCW versus NWO Revenge, like I'm still surprised and grateful that my parents like got it for me for Christmas one year alongside
Uh-huh.
my grandparents as well because that game was like 90 $100 and
Damn.
like considering, inflation at the time, like I'm legit shocked that I still was able
Yeah.
to receive that.
Yeah, $120 game now probably.
Yeah, which is kind of insane to think about. I know everyone's poo-pooing, and like rightfully so, not that we're gonna get into the economy right
Mhm.
now on our little video game anime podcast, but yeah, thinking about how expensive these cartridges got sometimes and me actually getting, WCW versus NWO Revenge, that was a game that really made an impact on me because Matt,
Mhm.
I think at the time I associate I had an N64 growing up and my older cousins, Matt, they were PlayStation players and I remember one time they said Jaren plays baby games on his Nintendo, and that made me feel really bad, Matt. And I remember getting WCW versus NWO Revenge and thinking, no, this is wrestling. They're fighting each other. This is a big
Mhm.
kid game, you
Mhm.
guys. But yeah, I remember the first night I got the game, I was so confused because
Mhm.
Matt, surprise, didn't read the
Uh-huh.
instructions. And I started up the game and I thought, why isn't my character moving? All they're doing is like taunting in the middle of the ring and then I
Nice.
would lose. And
Uh-huh.
that's when I realized after having struggling with a few days, going to my friend another friend named Matt at the time, going to their house and him teaching me how to
Mm-hmm.
play. He didn't have Revenge, but he had the previous game, WCW NW or WCW World Tour or something. And he taught me, no, you move with the D-pad, you use the analog stick to taunt and then activate your special, and then you have to grapple with, the face buttons, and then you have to hold it down to do the hard grapple. When you have your special meter, you do a hard grapple, and then you hit the analog stick to do your special move. And that,
Uh-huh.
I feel like that was one of the first moments I realized, oh, video games are complicated,
Uh-huh.
but I got an itch to, okay, this is what I want to do. This is my hobby. Like, I want to learn these mechanics. I want to actually be good at video games so I can actually enjoy them. And for the longest time, WCW versus NWO Revenge was my go-to game, just because, Matt, what I really loved about the wrestling games was the battle royale mode, where you would have 30, 40 people, four people in the ring at a time. When one person gets eliminated, someone new comes in. And at the time, we came from a religious family, and I remember sitting through church, and this is probably going to be sacrilegious, but or
Uh-huh.
blasphemous. During that hour of church, I was thinking, nope. In my mind, I was building up this wrestling pay-per-view in my head,
Nice.
saying, nope, there's going to be this big battle royale afterwards, and the winner would like fight whoever for the championship. And man, that I loved the Aki wrestling games, and I feel like this brings us to another topic, which is the accessories. Just because, Matt,
Mm-hmm.
I rented WrestleMania 2000, and they didn't give me the expansion pack, which you needed to play the game. And Matt,
Mm-hmm.
when you think about all the accessories that the Nintendo 64 had, from the expansion pack to the Rumble pack to the memory pack
Mm-hmm.
to the Hey You Pikachu mic, what are some accessory memories that come to your mind? And was that something where, oh, they announced the Rumble pack, did you go out and get it, or was that something that you had to wait on or didn't even interest you?
I think the only thing that I had was the transfer pack, and that's because
Hmm.
my parents bought me Pokemon Stadium, and it came with it. Which was honestly a great one of the packs to have, because Jaren playing Pokemon on the big screen, or maybe not the big screen, but like the the big TV. Oh man, that was a unforgettable experience, being able to just like see that for the first time. It was so
Yeah.
cool. But I don't know, the Rumble pack itself never really interested me when I was younger. I thought it was like a cool thing when I used it at my cousin's place, because I think it came with Starfox 64, and I thought
Right.
it was like a cool thing, but it never interested me enough to actually want one. Obviously, I never got a memory card, even though I should have. But the expansion pack was the one that always messed with me, because I had never bought Majora's Mask or Donkey
Donkey
Kong
Kong
64,
64, yep.
which I believe both came with that, and I didn't want to ask my parents to buy just the pack itself.
Hmm.
So whenever I got a game that needed it, I would remember I would always go up the street to one of my friends' places and ask if I can borrow his expansion pack, because like that, I needed to play this game I rented and I didn't know.
Matt, when I think
Hmm.
about the expansion pack, I remember renting renting WrestleMania 2000 for the first time, bringing it home, saying, "Oh, you need the expansion pack." Going like asking my parents to drive me back to Blockbuster, saying, "Oh, do you have this?" And then they gave it to me, and then struggling for like a good 2 hours trying to figure out how you're supposed to actually insert it into your console, because it came with like that gray key. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out how to like pry the initial, I guess, RAM out of the game and then insert your expansion pack. And man,
Hmm.
Matt, the only reason I have an expansion pack today, that there's one in my console right now, is one of my old neighbors growing up, Andrew. Hope you're doing well, bud. He let me borrow it. I used it and never gave it back, and he moved away. So
Damn.
sorry. Thanks, Andrew. But yeah, Matt, I feel like it was one of those things, the expansion pack, where I didn't realize was, what its purpose was, but I just knew, oh, I needed this to play Donkey Kong. I needed this to play Majora's. And I don't know, the Nintendo 60, I guess this just speaks to Nintendo as a company as a whole, but just thinking about all the different peripherals, like Hey You Pikachu, renting that and
Oh
getting the
yeah.
mic and it not doing anything. But for some reason, I also remember at the time I rented it, our CRT TV or whatever was kind of flickering. So I just remember playing Hey You Pikachu with a distorted
Uh-huh.
image and then me yelling into a mic and Pikachu not really doing anything and just that being like a really surreal gaming
Uh-huh.
experience. But oh man, Matt. Speaking about Nintendo, the expansion pack, I think one game that I really like, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1. I remember that coming in a blue cartridge.
Uh-huh.
And
Mhm.
Matt, when I think about the cartridge I have at home, it is it's the image of me having a thumb impression in the middle of like the cartridge itself because that was the one game I would play constantly over and over
Nice.
again. I would take it out of the system, I would put it back in the system over and over
Nice.
again. And I feel like I've said this story on our pod before, but I do attribute Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 as being one of the games that forced me to actually try to get better at the video games I played because, Matt,
Mhm.
as I said a few weeks ago, or honestly, Inside Baseball, as I said a few hours ago,
Uh-huh.
Matt, like growing up, I only played games if there was an easy mode. I only played games if there was like an invincibility code or something like that. And I remember my parents got me Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1. I was so excited. I brought it home. I opened up my Tips and Tricks magazine. I entered the code for perfect
Mhm.
balance,
Remember that?
and then nothing happened. I entered the code for unlock all skaters, unlock all levels, nothing happened. And I remember just having a cold sweat of why aren't my cheat codes working? And then that's when I had to force myself to learn the Tony Hawk mechanics. And I honestly am glad that I did just because, some of those like really defining moments for me in the Tony Hawk franchise is me building up, like getting those high scores, being able to consistently get silver medals in the Burnside, the second competition level, to consistently
Mhm.
getting gold and building my combo repertoire and just becoming visually seeing myself get better at this game. And then once again, that dumb kid, years later, I finally figured out why the codes I entered
Uh-huh.
didn't work. In that, Matt,
Uh-huh.
the codes said that you had to hold the R button.
Uh-huh.
Matt, I was holding the L button
Classic.
because I was a dumb kid
Classic.
without reading
Uh-huh.
comprehension. But yeah, Matt, speaking about code stories, I think I also told you this story as well. Matt,
Mhm.
our friend, mutual friend of ours, John, he used to live down the street. We would always visit each other's houses, play the N64 games that we
Mhm.
rented, and he rented Excitebike 64. And Matt, same thing happens. We opened up, or John had a computer at the time, so he printed out his cheat
Mhm.
sheet, and we were entering the codes because we wanted moon gravity in Excitebike 64. And Matt,
Yeah.
codes weren't working for some reason. Like we were entering all these button combinations and nothing was happening. And then we John thought, oh, maybe we need to reset the game or
Uh-huh.
whatever. So he reset the game, nothing happened, and I remember staring at the main menu, the press start screen. And then it occurred to me,
Uh-huh.
Matt, John, we're not playing Excitebike 64. We're playing something something Supercross. And he said, oh, right. And then he found the Supercross cheats, and then we entered Moon
Good
Gravity.
go.
But Matt,
Uh-huh.
this reminded me of something you said earlier in the game. Do you have any memories of you excitedly going to rent a game, getting the cassette box behind the box art, bringing it up, taking it home, and realizing, oh, the game I wanted wasn't actually behind the box this whole time?
Yeah, I actually have, I think, a good story for that, which is that I wanted to rent 1080 snowboarding, and
Yes.
I don't know if it was just a wrong box or I was just being a dumb kid, but I ended up renting one of my favorite games for the N64, which is also kind of relating back to your previous story of Tony Hawk, the game that forced me or made me learn how to get good at games.
Yeah.
And this game, Jaren, was Snowboard Kids 2.
Oh, classic, Matt. Such a classic.
Jaren, I love Snowboard Kids 2. That is,
Yes.
I think, one of my favorite games of that generation. It
Agreed.
so heavily improved on not that I knew this at the time, but like, going back to like try them both, it heavily improved on Snowboard Kids 1. It just felt so good to play. I loved the map design in that game. Like, if I know that for a lot of people, Mario Kart 64 is the de facto racing game for Nintendo 64, or maybe even like Diddy Kong Racing is a de facto racing game for Nintendo 64. But for me, it was Snowboard Kids 2, and honestly, second for me, Iggy's Wrecking Balls. That game
Oh,
was my number two, I think, like racing game, and I don't know, Jared, just that was, I think, the best mistake I could have made at that time. I love you, 1080 Snowboarding. Your soundtrack is dope, but you don't compare to anime kids dropping pans on each other, I think.
man, Matt. That's a one. I know they tried to reboot that series. I
Yeah.
don't know. There was like a DS version or something like
Hmm.
that, but
Hmm.
nothing encaptured, you know,
Yeah.
maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it is just, that golden age of playing video games, but again, 1080, or I mean, Snowboard Kids 2 was such a
Uh-huh.
good game, such a unique art style where I think when they did try to reboot it, it was,
It
it
was a
didn't have, yeah,
yeah.
it looked different and it didn't have the same
Yeah.
charm,
The reboot
but
for the DS, I think gameplay wise was mostly there, but it lacked a lot of the charm that I think
right,
Snowboard Kids 2 had.
right. Man, Snowboard, and Matt, that was an
Hmm.
Atlas game, right?
I think it was. Yeah, I'll be honest, Sharon, I can't 100% be sure on that because I back then I didn't really pay attention to developers, but
Yeah,
I
I
feel
feel
like it
that.
was. Yeah.
I think the only, oh, this wasn't the game I was expecting to rent story that comes to my mind was I wanted to rent Ready to Rumble Boxing Round 2, but
Hmm.
it had Ready to Rumble Round 1, I guess, behind it. And I
Uh-huh.
ended up renting that and playing through it. And I wouldn't get to play Round 2 until like years later on like the PlayStation or something.
Damn.
But Matt,
Hmm.
I think as we kind of wind down our trip to memory lane, I think I'm gonna kind of name some of the heavy hitters and
Uh-huh.
some less heavy or lesser known
Hmm.
games on the N64. And I just want to know, your general thoughts if you have any memories attached to it and just anything you want to share. But
Hmm.
Matt,
Hmm.
have to say it, one of the big two. Matt, do you have any memories attached to Mario 64?
Jaron, I actually do not. I didn't have Mario 64 when I
Hmm.
was a kid, so my experience with the Mario 3D Mario franchises really only started at what was it? What was the GameCube one called?
Sunshine?
Yes, Sunshine, which I
Right.
didn't like.
Yeah, I think for me, I still am to a degree. I'm not the biggest fan of platformers where my appreciation for the Mario, like the 3D Mario games, really did come through the Galaxy games. But
Hmm.
for Mario 64 in particular, that was oh, I remember, I'm not sure if you remember the store, but it was called Maxi and Co, I believe, and it was kind of like a department store similar to like Loblaws here in Canada. I guess the Maxi and Co in like the Heartland area, for those that know Mississauga, eventually became a Loblaws. But anyway, my only memory for Mario 64 is this was in that, purgatory period of I'm still waiting to get a Nintendo 64 for the first time and me waiting for the N64 kiosk and Maxi and Co to get a turn to play Mario 64 for however long. And then I think my parents saw me waiting 20 minutes and my mom, being my mom, thank you, mom, asking the kids ahead of them just to hurry up so I could play before we left. So that's my only real memory of Mario 64. Again, didn't really rented it a few times, and I only really remember just killing King Bomb a few times before, but no real attachment to it. But Matt, have to say, I would argue the de facto N64 game. What's your any more memories attached to The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time?
Yeah, that was the first Zelda game I completed, and I don't know that was like a really revolutionary game at the time, which I really couldn't appreciate how revolutionary it was,
Right.
because like yeah, I think that was the first like big RPG I guess that I ever really like knowingly went through, and it was
Yeah.
like a I'm so glad that was probably that was one of my first experiences with that genre or level of game even.
Yeah. And sorry, I think before I just wanted to say this about Mario 64. I think the de facto Mario 64 memory for a lot of people, myself included, is that giant sea eel, that pink snake,
Oh
water
yeah,
snake thing
yeah, yeah.
from I forget the world, but just that image burned into my head of like it being absolutely terrifying at the time, given how, you were underwater, you see your like oxygen level depleting, and you see this giant snake that was so gigantic where
Hmm.
even when I look back at it, like you look at it in today's standards and it's just like funny polygons, but at the time, man,
Yeah.
that was such an imposing image that I will always be burned in my mind. At least the concept or the idea behind it, not the actual visuals itself. But yeah, for Ocarina of Time, again, I think that and Final Fantasy VII are games that I didn't get to appreciate them when, they were actually being these big revolutionary titles for their respective platforms just because I was too young, didn't have the as no surprise, didn't have the reading comprehension, was bad at games. But I think for me, my Ocarina of Time memory is watching a older because Matt, we come from Filipino households, and I feel like for Filipinos, you have that cool older female cousin, and just seeing her play through, just playing Ocarina of Time during a fam jam, and just being so, you know, enchanted by like her knowledge of the game, her dealing with all these different enemies, her commentary. Like I think that's what like sticks out to me of just watching someone be good at a video game.
Hmm.
And yeah, I wouldn't play Ocarina of Time until like a few years later, and then even that, all I remember from my time with it was, oh, I liked fishing for some reason. I forget why, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, Matt. Star Fox 64. Do you have anything for that?
I remember going through it just normally the first time, getting to the end boss and thinking, "Oh wow, that was it. That game is so short," and then
Yeah.
really not comprehending what Star Fox 64's like
Yep.
real gameplay loop is.
Multiplayer was really fun too, but I
Hmm.
think yeah, as you said, Matt, the first time I finished Star Fox 64, I remember doing that like on vacation, staying at our aunt's house in Florida, and just playing through it in the mornings before we went to our day activities, and then thinking, oh, that was cool. It's kind of short, but then realizing, oh, wait, if you went through another path in the first level, it's like a whole
Hmm.
different game. You get a
Hmm.
tank and all these other things. And like just me, again, feeling inadequate of, wow, video games are so much bigger than I thought they were. And just kind of being blown away by like those alternative paths. But
Hmm.
yeah, I believe Star Fox 64 was like the first Rumble Pack game as well.
Yeah.
And Matt, I thought the Rumble Pack was kind of stupid, to be honest. I didn't have an official N64 Rumble Pack. I had like a third party brand that you needed a battery for.
Hmm.
But like it didn't really add much for me. I thought it was a cool novelty, but I didn't. I remember the marketing and like the advertisement being a lot more hype than they actually were. But Matt,
Hmm.
you said it, 1080 snowboarding.
Yeah.
Anything that comes to mind there?
Jaren, honestly, when I think about the gameplay for 1080 snowboarding, it's mostly just me being very fortunate in getting a completed save that had the gold and silver surfers and just like
Oh, so
blazing
cool,
through.
Matt.
But
Yeah,
man, Jaren, the work your body character select music just permanently lives inside my head.
so good, Matt. So good. My only memory for that, my initial memory that comes to mind was I remember at the time my parents were, upgrading their car and we were at a dealership. And I
Hmm.
remember the process taking a lot longer than, well, I don't know how long the process of buying a car was. And I think them test driving and like doing paperwork. But I remember just in the lobby because they had their own N64 kiosk. And the whole time I was just playing 1080 snowboarding. And I think
Uh-huh.
the trick mode, I believe, and just having so much fun in this random car dealership.
Oh yeah.
But Matt,
Hmm.
do you have any? Did you play a lot of Donkey Kong 64, or is that something that's not really in your repertoire as well?
No, Jaren, the to be honest, the Donkey Kong series as a whole never really
Yes,
clicked for me.
same.
Mm.
And yeah, I remember renting it a few times and thinking, "Oh, this was fun." But Matt, I
Hmm.
think for me, my de facto platforming game experience, again, too bad at video games to really comprehend it. Mario Kart at the to appreciate Mario 64 at the time. I think Donkey Kong 64 was too late in the console to really appreciate that as well. I just remember
Yeah.
that being a beefy game, but Matt,
Hmm.
for me, my de facto platformer was Banjo Kazooie. I loved that
Uh.
game so
Hmm.
much. Just the time you talk to Mumbo Jumbo and you becoming a washing machine to, I forget the level, but then if you were to stare through this ice block, you would see like this ice key in the background and thinking, oh, what's this ice key? Like, what does it do? And I don't know. Banjo Kazooie holds a special place in my heart just because, like, again, it was one of those things that I use as a benchmark of this made me force myself to become better at video games. And I remember it getting a second life for me where I would get a issue of tips and tricks and just reading like cheat codes and stuff. So I think I have a lot of fun memories for Banjo Kazooie. And it's one of those things where when it was re released on Xbox Live Arcade, like for some reason I couldn't go back to it just because I don't know about you, Matt, but I feel like with a lot of my nostalgia fondness pulls, like
Hmm.
it's really hit or miss. Sometimes I don't want to taint that original memory. And then sometimes like it is just, oh, these probably just don't hold up and which further is tainting the original memory. But it's also
Yeah.
one of those things where I don't know, man. Sometimes like I like I want to leave it in the past and just kind of move forward with all my
Hmm.
degen hobbies of today. But
Hmm.
Matt, are there any titles that you want to kind of give some, like take a trip down memory lane with?
Yeah, Jaren, there are. Jaren, one that I'm glad is on the Nintendo Switch N64 like online is Pokemon Puzzle League. I don't know if you ever played that a lot when you were
Yes,
younger.
yes.
Jaren, that is such a good puzzle game. Playing it on the Switch, I realized this game was really hard. I don't know how
Yep.
I was like how I got so far in this when I was younger, but man, that game was wild. I don't know if you have any more to add to that.
I remember renting it,
Hmm.
and man, I feel like a lot of my well, I've said this before in this episode as well, is just a lot of me being bad at video games, renting it,
Uh huh.
feeling, oh, how come video games are so hard? And it's that mentality of thinking, oh, I hope it really is re-released in some capacity so I can actually go back and try to appreciate the games I couldn't comprehend at the time. Where
Hmm.
I think, this might contradict what I just said about like the nostalgia pulls, where if I understood the mechanics of the game, I think I'm okay with leaving it in the past just because I have my memories for them. But
Hmm.
if it's a game that I felt defeat, like something like Chameleon Twist 2, Matt, I hated that game growing up because there was one platforming section that I couldn't for the life of me do, and like I legit remember crying, like bawling my eyes off afterwards, thinking this
Oh
game
man.
sucks. I can't do it. Where I, if opportunity presents itself, I totally want to get a copy of Chameleon Twist to play through just to see where's the part that I struggled with that made baby Jaren cry. Finish that part and then never touch that game again.
Uh-huh. Something in that vein that exists for me of just not understanding how this game worked, and I don't know, just not never really getting far into it was Jet Force Gemini.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, like I think that exists in the exact same space that a Chameleon Twist existed for you, where I had no idea what was going on. I don't actually understand what's happening in this game. The box art looks so cool. Why
Yep.
why isn't this game cool?
Speaking of box arts being cool and why isn't this game cool, Matt, did you play Blast Corps?
I did not play Blast Corps.
Matt, I couldn't tell you what Blast Corps is. I remember renting it, being utterly confused and thinking, man, this sucks. Though that would be one of the titles I would go back to just try to comprehend now.
I think one of the titles that also exists like that for me is Robotron 64.
Yep.
The difference between the box art and what the game actually is was just so jarring for me. I think that might have been my first experience with the equivalent, the like Nintendo 64 equivalent of a dual stick shooter. 'Cause that's
Right.
what Robotron was, right? Or maybe I'm thinking
Yeah.
the wrong game.
Well,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, yeah, I remember like the original Robotron you can get on Xbox Live Arcade for free at some point, and yeah, I remember playing it as well.
But Jen, I think one of the first sports games I was really into on the Nintendo 64, which was a special place in my heart, is NFL Blitz.
Yes,
I
so good.
really liked NFL Blitz. I at the time, outside of hey, you have to get the football to the other end of the field, didn't understand any other football rules. Like didn't understand what downs were.
Yeah,
So sometimes I'd just be frustrated on hey, why can't I? Why did I lose the ball? Why is like my cousin have the ball now?
yeah.
And like hey, why can't I just kick the ball in from here? Like I just didn't really understand how football actually works, other than turning yourself on fire and throwing a ball real cool.
On the topic of sports games, two that comes to mind are, well, three. One would be NBA Hang Time and then NBA Showtime. I remember those were games I would play at my neighbor's house a lot as well. Uh, Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey is another game that I was really excited to show my grandpa. And the only thing I remember from that game is if the goalie does like a really good save, he would become like a brick wall for like a split second. I thought that was like the coolest.
Nice, nice.
And I know Ken Griffey Jr. had or he was part of a baseball game, and I don't actually remember anything about it, but I just like the name Ken Griffey Jr. But yeah, man, any other games that come to mind from the
Yeah.
N64 era?
Yeah. Jaren, I never really understood this game too much because for me, I think I mixed up this game and F-Zero a lot, which is, do you remember Extreme G?
Yes.
That racing game? Like, I don't know, something about that game looks so cool with its futuristic bikes that go super fast, and there's like, oh yeah, this is way better than Mario Kart. Look how fast they're going, kind of like idea to me in my head. Even
Yeah.
though I was never really good at that game.
Oh
But
man.
yeah, I don't know if you ever played that a lot or not.
No, that was one of those games where I would see at Blockbuster, but never actually pulled the trigger on as well. But it looked cool. A lot of games looked cool at the time.
Yeah. Jared,
But,
you know what?
Yeah.
I'm surprised that we went this far into a Nintendo 64 episode without mentioning Super Smash Brothers. But I feel like that could just be a whole thing on its own.
I think given our relationship or the Saturday morning arcade Mistake Zone relationship with Super Smash Brothers, like I feel like if that was to come up, that would be our showstopper, or like we end off on Super Smash Brothers
Yeah.
because I said it before, like the de facto, arguably the de facto N64 game would be Ocarina of Time, but I think my personal de facto N64 game is my top three when I think about like my favorite N64 games of all time and ones that have meaning to me are Majora's Mask, it's
Mhm.
Goldeneye, and it's Super Smash Brothers. I think GoldenEye and Super Smash Brothers in particular is just because the multiplayer aspect of the games and how those dominated fam jams
Mhm.
post
Mhm.
release. And I feel like even though Perfect Dark was, you know, in a lot of ways, mechanically as well, better, quote unquote, than GoldenEye 64, I feel like
Yeah.
GoldenEye 64 was the de facto multiplayer game before Super Smash Brothers, just because afterwards, I feel like when Perfect Dark came out, no one was. I feel like that was when the N64 like um, fam jam status was kind of fading, and like people, like a lot of family and friends were kind of graduating or getting other consoles, but
Mhm.
like the heyday of GoldenEye, the heyday of Super Smash Brothers, like even afterwards, when new consoles came out, like I wouldn't be surprised if someone was playing Smash Brothers. I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
if someone was playing GoldenEye, just because I think to me the I know this is going to be unfair for Perfect Dark, but
Uh-huh.
for me it's the meme of "Mom, I want Perfect Dark. We have Perfect Dark at home, and it's a GoldenEye." And I think
Uh-huh.
that's not a knock on Perfect Dark. It's just GoldenEye was that good and that defining to at least
Mhm.
the households that I visited growing up. And
Yeah.
whether it be the you trying to get double O difficulty on all the single player levels, you doing the cheat codes, having paint gun mode, someone
Oh
being
man.
odd job, just the split screen multiplayer, yelling at people not to screen look at you. Like,
Uh-huh.
I feel like I have all those memories for GoldenEye and like none for Perfect Dark, just because
Mhm.
everyone had GoldenEye and I feel like that was enough. But
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I guess before we close off on Super Smash Brothers, Matt, GoldenEye
Mhm.
64, is that anything that, you know, you have memory wise when it comes to that game?
Yeah, like just the same as you, it is such a strong fam jam memory type game for me. The only thing that I feel Perfect Dark had over GoldenEye for me was the alternate fire mode. I thought that
Yeah.
was like the coolest thing. But when we were at somebody's house when the Perfect Dark owner cousin wasn't there, like GoldenEye sufficed perfectly. Really, like the alternate fire was the coolest part for me for Perfect Dark. Personally, I didn't
Yeah.
really care too much about the campaign portion of it, but Jaren setting up that laptop gun turret behind a fake wall and catching someone off guard. Oh, I don't think there's any memory as concrete in my head as getting my cousin with that for the first time.
Oh, that was so good. The laptop game was so good in Perfect
Mhm.
Dark, but
Mhm.
I think for every laptop gun memory that I have, which is one, like I think back to, okay, let's do custom GoldenEye games, let's do remote mines, let's do rocket
Oh yeah.
launchers, let's do slap fights, and
God,
man, that GoldenEye was so good. And
Sharon, the mines were so good.
yep,
The game changing realization when we found out that you could blow up the remote mines without switching to the watch. Ooh,
yep,
that was wild.
game changer,
And
man, game
yeah,
changer.
and the extreme boringness of proximity mines only was, oh man, those are such good memories, Jaren.
Oh man, I love GoldenEye. Have you, with the expansion pass, man, did you dabble in? I think I asked you before, but since then, have you dabbled in it with the pals or?
No, I have not. I'm waiting for a multiplayer experience to go in on that.
Okay, no, fair enough,
Mm-hmm.
fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt,
Mm-hmm.
before we end off with Super Smash Brothers, I feel like I need to mention Pokemon Snap in some
Mm-hmm.
capacity. One, the stupid blockbuster printing kiosk, but two,
Oh
Matt,
man, I forgot about that. Yeah.
I think my de facto Pokemon Snap memory was me, asking my mom to buy this game for me. Her doing it. That was one of my like 2 games of the year. Bringing it home and then finishing it within an afternoon and then feeling like this weird sense of, oh no, did my mom just waste her money on me?
Oh no.
And I remember just replaying it, discovering all the different Pokemon, monuments or like getting you for the first time. But
Hmm.
I remember one afternoon thinking, oh, I wonder how long I could, like, what's the fastest I could, beat this game. And then I
Hmm.
remember clocking in. This was before I knew speedrunning was a thing or whatnot.
Yeah.
And then me finishing the game in an hour and 16 minutes. Like, even that time is like burned into my mind. Like, I started right at, I believe, 1 p.m. When I
Hmm.
finished, it was like 2:16 and thinking, wow, I'm really good at this game. And
Je-
not since then,
uh-huh.
I'm scared to look at, like, go on YouTube and put Pokemon Snap speedrun and just having my childhood innocence crushed like that.
Man, Jaren, this episode is longer than your speed run of Pokemon Snap.
Not
Uh-huh.
pretty good for something that we were unsure of what we would talk about for this episode. But that
Uh-huh.
just speaks to the power of the Nintendo 64 and our
Hmm.
nostalgia to it. But Matt, do
Hmm.
you have any memories with Pokemon Snap?
Yeah, I don't remember Pokemon Snap taking that long either, but I do remember that I really enjoyed replaying it and trying to get, hey, the perfect picture of these Pidgeys making the whirlwind, or hey, look, I got Pikachu on the surfboard. Like figuring out all those little, I don't know if you would call them Easter eggs. I guess like more so like
Yeah,
side mechanics of getting Pokemon to do what you want them to do for the picture is really
yeah.
interesting to me. I also, Jaren, really remember playing that game and then being really excited that our school was taking a trip to African lion safari
Oh, that's cool, Matt.
and getting a disposable camera for that. And I think the really cool thing about that, for the people who don't like know, African Lion Safari is the type of zoo where you drive through the exhibit
Yeah.
and the animals are around you. So that was, really Pokemon Snap for me at the time. And I was so excited to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take the coolest pictures of these animals, and
That's so cool. Do
I
you
should
still
really
have some of
see.
those pictures
I,
from?
I don't know. I want to go through some old family photo albums to see if I have anything from there.
Oh, that'd be so good, Matt. But yeah, I
Hmm.
think before we take off Pokemon Snap, I remember going to my relatives in New Jersey one year, and then my cousin telling me, "Hey, if you do something in like the river level, you can get Hitmonchan to appear." And I thought, no way! I played this game to death. I didn't know you can get Hitmonchan. And I remember going to my other cousin's house because I brought my copy of Pokemon Snap with me,
Uh huh.
playing through to get to that level, and then doing everything he said to get Hitmonchan to appear, and Hitmonchan not appearing, Matt.
Damn.
And then when I saw him later in that vacation, I thought, hey, what the heck? And then he told me, oh, you must have like an outdated version or something. Because you're so
Right.
stupid, Matt.
Oh god, that's quintessential kid crap
Oh
right there.
man. But Matt,
Hmm.
I guess yep. Let's end with the showstopper. I guess Super Smash Brothers, iconic on the Nintendo 64. That commercial, I feel like we can go 15 minutes talking about the commercial for the game alone.
Uh
But
huh.
Matt, Super Smash Brothers plays such a big role in our friend group, in Saturday Morning Arcade, in the Mistake Zone. But what do you remember? What are some of your memories when it comes to the original Super Smash Bros?
I'll be honest, Jaron. I don't really have too many specific memories of Super Smash
Hmm.
Brothers because I really do just remember having a lot of general fun playing it,
Yeah.
like the excitement of this crossover that I've never seen before,
Yeah.
and I don't know, Jaren. I that's basically like the craziest thing I feel like you could have seen as a kid, where all of these franchises are collaborating to create one big like fighting game for you to play.
And it just amazes me just to see how much the franchise has grown. But going to the original Super Smash Brothers, again, as you said, it was just this spectacle of seeing these, classic characters that we all know. We saw Pikachu, we saw, Mario, but then it was also seeing Jigglypuff, Luigi, Captain Falcon, and Ness being unlocked, like for the most part, again, I said this a lot during this episode, but it was this notion of seeing my concept or my worldview of video games expand so much. Where when I saw Ness and I saw Captain Falcon, thought, who are these people? And then my cousin explaining, oh, Ness is like this kid from this Japanese RPG, and Captain Falcon is from the F-Zero games, and me just thinking, what? Yeah, like what the heck? Like that was something that I feel like. Sure, I get hyped about seeing, especially in a rollout of a new Super Smash Brothers game, of who's coming out, like who's the next newcomer they're adding, but seeing, like, I can't forget seeing Ness for the first time. I can't forget seeing Captain Falcon for the first time. Just even seeing Jigglypuff be included of the game was like so surprising to me, just because I feel like a few weeks earlier, in my head at least, I thought, oh, wasn't Jigglypuff just on an episode of Pokemon? And I don't know, man. Like, I feel like with Super Smash Brothers, it opened the door to so much possibility. And I know that sounds so corny, but it was, again, as you said, the first time I ever saw something like that. And just to see it expanding beyond that, like, don't get me started on Melee, don't get me started on, Brawl and like everything else. But just to see it in its quote unquote like humble beginnings is still wild to think about. And yeah, again, it dominated fam jams. Just to see how, like, just playing through it single player and break the targets was so fun back in the day as well. And yeah, man, like Super Smash Brothers means a lot. Like the franchise itself means a lot to me. Where, I hate to admit that as much as I don't have a lot of core memories when it comes to the original one, just the spectacle behind it is something that like I'll always appreciate. And I'm glad to see that it stood the test of time and it is this phenomenon that it is today. And again, I'm curious to see where the franchise goes, but just seeing its thinking about its beginnings really makes me feel good just about it in general. But Matt, as you said, this took longer than my Pokemon Snap speed run. So Matt, any closing thoughts on the Nintendo 64?
Good system. I rated a 64 out of 64.
Matt, last question. If you could get one of the funky N64 colors, which one would have you gotten?
I don't know, Jen. I was actually very, very happy with the standard gray. Yeah. But if I think about it, maybe the see-through purple. I mean, that might have been the GameCube.
No, there was a see-through purple one. I would have loved a jungle green N64, but again, the tried and true N64. I still have it at my parents' house. I wanna. Every time I think about playing it, I think, I need like a good CRTV for that. But yeah, Matt, really beefy episode. But that's what happens when you take a stroll down memory lane for a console that means so much to us growing up. But as always, Matt, I want to thank you for joining me this week to talk about our many mistakes, both past and present. I want to thank Blockbuster. I don't want to thank the kids who would hide games behind box art that weren't those games.
Jaren and I did that.
I did it too, Matt.
If I could have rent a game 1 week, if I could have rent a game 1 week, I'm going to put it behind a game I think no one's going to rent. So I can get it next time.
Matt, if I couldn't rent a game a week, I would put that behind VHS boxes of movies that were really old and bottom shelf movies that no one would probably rent. But Matt, beefy episode for a beefy console to us, but please take it away.
This has been the Mistake Zone, and we are definitely not out of N64 nostalgia stories.
I was really bad at video games.